immunity. That was a question that was bandied about. Why don't you explain what that is first, and then how it's applicable to you and your experience?
Well, let me ask you this. What is your understanding of it?
I don't get it.
You don't get it?
No.
Okay. First of all, so I'm not an attorney. So I'm not going to be able to really dig down into the legal doctrines of it. But what it boils down to is a public employee cannot be civilly liable for a violation of someone's constitutional rights if whatever they were doing was they were acting in good faith. Essentially, that's very simplistic. There's more kind of prongs to it than that. But basically, if I was doing my job in what would be looked at from a reasonable person in my same position, a reasonable officer, what I did during that time, let's say just totally fictitious, but I get out of the car, want to call, somebody points a gun at me, I pull out my gun, we get in a gun battle, and I shoot and kill this person. Totally fictional, okay?
Yeah.
I'm going to get, the department, the city, we are going to get sued in federal court for violating the deceased person's civil rights, okay? They're going to claim that it's a Fourth Amendment violation.
Okay, that's where I got lost when I was reading this. That's why I don't get it. How is that? How can the department be sued for that?
Oh, have you never seen these attorneys on TV?
I have, but there's no.
It's an industry.
Yeah, that's what I don't get is you didn't violate anyone's constitutional amendment when you're in a gun battle.
Well, they will claim that you did, though. Absolutely, 100%.
Okay. But that's where I got lost in the narrative, in the literature. I didn't get it.
Joey, every police department there's not a police department in California that doesn't have at least one, if not dozens, of federal lawsuits pending against them.
For that exact kind of fictitious.
For everything. You name it. Everything. Okay. It's like my former chief used to say, we'd be having a discussion and like, oh yeah, they said they're going to file a federal lawsuit. And the chief would say, get in line.
Okay. All right.
Because it just happened. It's just part of what we're always getting sued. Always. Cities, police departments, counties.
But I guess the reason I brought it up is because that's part of the defund, abolish police type of narrative is that you guys are protected by this.
So
and I don't get that either.
So we are, if personally, if we are acting in good faith, if we're following standards. Let me give you an example. So years ago, going way back, this little company in Arizona invented this thing called a taser. Okay. And the taser, when it first came out, it's yellow. It's got darts on wires that shoot out. And you can incapacitate somebody without having to beat the living crap out of them with a baton, which happens sometimes, right? I mean, you got a guy that's 3 times your size. He's on LSD and he just wants to kill everybody within his vision. Yeah. This gave us a tool to help us resolve things, right? And so as we started using these things, we realized how incredibly important they were because we could incapacitate somebody and they essentially were uninjured for the most part, or a lot less injured than they would have been if it had gotten into a hands-on fist fight. Less officers getting hurt because we're trying to avoid that, right? So we got this great tool that I know this is going to go south. He's failing to obey my orders. He wants to fight. He's, got a knife in his hand, whatever it is. Boom, I pull the trigger, incapacitated, run the thing for 5 seconds, throw the handcuffs on, and the problem's resolved. Okay, I'm totally simplifying it, but that's kind of in a nutshell how the taser was introduced to us. And it works. It's very effective. Over time, because some cops are just dumb, they create new case law, by doing stupid things. So at some point down the road from when we got the tasers, it was decided in a federal court that we really should not be using these things on basically passive resistive people. Okay. So if they're just not going along with the program, but they're no threat, like, no, you're going to jail. You need to get up. You need to stand up. You're going to jail. There's no fight or anything.
Right.
you can't use a taser to incapacitate them at that point because they're not actively fighting you. They're not actively doing anything. So that became kind of the new rule now, right? So that person, that officer in that case right there was granted qualified immunity because there was no case before that said it was wrong for you to shoot somebody who's passively resisting. Okay. But now we have that case. So now if an officer uses a taser on somebody who's passively resisting, they'll lose their qualified immunity or could lose their qualified immunity for that because it's already been established that you cannot do that. So that's where it weighs into, was it reasonable? So if officer today does that, you got a protest or something, people are locking arms and they use a taser on somebody like that. The court, when it gets to federal court, they're going to look at it and go, okay, we got to deal with qualified immunity. Has this ever happened before? Why, yes, it has. And we told everybody in law enforcement, don't do this anymore. So you were not acting reasonably when you did this because we've already had this go to court. It's already been decided at a federal level that you guys can't do this anymore. And so that's part of those legal updates that you saw on like my training sheet. That's just what we learn over time. And that's a very simplistic answer. But basically, if you do something, get sued in federal court, and it's determined that it was reasonable and lawful, and there's no case before you or before that told you not to do that specific thing. In other words, the set of facts match, and you should be aware that you can't do that anymore. If that doesn't exist, then qualified immunity sets in. Your department, your city may still lose a civil lawsuit and pay out millions of dollars, but the officer who did that would not be personally liable. In other words, I can go out and do my job and I don't have to fear, if I do my job right, if I'm doing my job legally within the Constitution and within the confines of well-established case law, playing by the rules, doing everything right. If I go out and do my job like that, I don't have to fear that in 2 years when this court case goes to federal court, I don't have to fear that I'm going to lose everything that I own, take my house, take my cars, take my life savings.
Right.
How do you do your job living in that fear, right? I'm Officer X. Let's say I got 20 Officer X. Greatest officers, they do everything. They play by the book. They're smart. They understand the law. How are they going to go out and do their job knowing that if some court decides that they shouldn't have done what they did, even though they thought it was reasonable, that they stand the chance of losing everything they own? That's what the qualified immunity is there to protect. And it's not just cops. It's all government. It's anyone in government. Government is the only entity that can violate your civil rights. Okay? Like you own a grocery store, you can't violate people's civil rights. I mean, you can violate ADA laws and things like that, but only the government can violate your civil rights. Okay? And that's generally, most of it falls within the Fourth Amendment. Your right to be free from illegal, unlawful searches, seizures, things like that. So, and that would be with an arrest or a use of force. A use of force is a seizure of a person. And so what you go to court on, what you get sued for is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. You violated that person's Fourth Amendment rights by shooting them, by falsely arresting them, whatever it is. And so, the argument against qualified immunity is there's no accountability. Cops never get held accountable for anything. And that's, frankly, it's not true. There's a whole process for that, whether it's criminal.
Is it similar to the one you talked about before as far
Absolutely.
as you have external, internal investigations, criminal, the attorney general, not the attorney general, but the prosecutor?
Well, you might have the attorney general. You might have the United States Justice Department. That's exactly what happened in Ferguson, Missouri. After that was all over and the Obama administration ordered their Department of Justice to conduct their own investigation into what happened in Ferguson.
Right. So that's where I'm lost because I just didn't get. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say nobody remembers that report because they really never, although they publicized it. That's a good read. Take a couple hours and read it. Read it sometime, and you'll find out that the United States Department of Justice under President Obama conducted a very thorough investigation into Ferguson. You'll also find that they found that the officer did absolutely nothing wrong.
Okay,
even though that's not the narrative.
Well, and that's actually why I wanted to have this chat with you, is because it's difficult to understand everything that's going on. This is a very complex topic. And in qualified immunity, when I admitted, I just didn't get it because I still to this point, and I appreciate you explaining it to me, because in business, we have something called the corporate veil, which is very similar. And that was the best thing I could look at as far as analogies, is that when I started companies in the past, you incorporate. And once you incorporate a business, you are protected from liability exposure to your stuff.
Right. Personal
company. Yeah. If your company gets sued or something happens and you have to go bankrupt, you don't lose your house and your home and your investments and all those things. And that's why I just didn't see the fact that qualified immunity was somehow a pejorative. It just didn't, to me, if you're following the law, and it looks like from these examples anyway, is that you're still under all of those guidelines. You're still under all of those laws, right, including the Constitution. And if you are caught doing something, you will be arrested. And that's the whole point. And then are you civilly liable? Let's just say you did, in that example, do something illegal, and you've already established through qualified immunity that you've already established through precedent that you can't do that, the tasers. Can you then lose your stuff?
Sure.
Yeah. So then I don't understand.
It's qualified. It's immunity that's qualified.
Yeah, exactly.
By the fact that if you did the right thing and followed law and it was reasonable, then you can be immune from civil liability. It's not absolute immunity. There's no such thing in our world as absolute immunity. I can't just run out and do anything I want and go, I can't sue me. It's qualified that we were legitimately doing our job. Police officers are out there on the street literally making decisions in split seconds. Okay. Yeah. How do you do that? How do you make a decision in a split second, knowing that this 1/10 of a second that I'm living through right now could literally affect whether or not I have a place to live somewhere down the road, or whether or not I have any money in my bank, or whether or not my marriage is going to be still there, whether or not my children will be able to survive. If I don't have a job and I don't have a house and I've lost everything, how do you make a critical decision with that hanging over your head? It's nearly impossible. I don't want to protect bad cops. I don't want to protect cops that are breaking the law. Nobody wants to work with those people. But in order to do our job effectively, it plays a big part.
Well, it's the same thing with companies. There's no one. I don't think anybody in the corporate world would start a company if they didn't have the corporate veil to protect them, because it's the same thing. Why would you put yourself out there? You just go get a job. You wouldn't start a company and then get sued and lose everything.
Yeah. Let your boss take on all the liability. Just give me a paycheck.
Exactly.
That's all I want.
Exactly.